Hello and welcome to the Green Voice podcast. I'm Grant Ervin with S&B USA, coming to you from the Point Park University Center for Media Innovation here in downtown Pittsburgh. We have Mr. Wayne Gaines on controls, making sure that we sound great today with our guest, fabulous Pittsburgh architect, Nathan St. Germain from Studio St. Germain. Nathan, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Grant. How are you?
It's doing wonderful. Just put the microphone a little closer to you,
Okay.
so that we pick up your radio voice, right?
Yes.
So that we hear everything that you have to say here today. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's we were just talking before we jumped on. We haven't had an architect on the Green Voice podcast. I think you might be the first. I have to check the files on that. But,
Okay.
really interested to, learn a little bit more about you and the studio and the work that you guys do, but also talk about kind of design and, kind of where we are in the world today in terms of good architecture and green infrastructure and green buildings and all those great things. But, maybe before we kind of jump into some of those topics, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and kind of your background. And
Sure.
And not a Pittsburgher originally, correct?
No, I'm not.
So it would be great to hear about your journey to Pittsburgh. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, my journey to Pittsburgh, I was actually born and raised in Rhode Island, and then
Okay.
I went to school in New Jersey and very close to New York City.
Okay.
So it was a natural progression just to work in New York City. So I spent now about half my career living and working in New York City. And while I was there, my wife, who's a native of Western Pennsylvania, went to graduate school in New York, and that's how we met.
Okay.
And then we had gotten married in Pittsburgh in 2011. And then we had decided, after moving back, going back to New York, we started to think about longer term and maybe being closer to one family. So in 2012, we decided to move to Pittsburgh and landed in the Strip District.
Okay.
Lived in a place called the Brake House Lofts,
Oh,
which
yeah.
were a former Westinghouse brake factory right off of Liberty.
Part of the air brake operation, right?
Yeah, right. And right across from the Pittsburgh Opera off of Liberty, and really enjoyed living there. And at the time, there weren't many places to live in the Strip District.
Yeah.
At that time, there
You
was
were like a Strip District pioneer.
I don't know about a pioneer, but so there was the Brake House Loft. There was also the Cork Factory, and there was a condo development called Auto Milk. And what was interesting, and it was kind of serendipitous, was when I moved, we didn't have a car. I didn't have a car for about 20 years.
Okay.
And so part of going to the Brake House was we wanted to be on like a public transit
Sure.
line that had a good headway and things. And
Shout out to the 87 route, I believe.
Yes,
That was-
yes.
yeah.
And but what was
I always try to give self promotions for other guests like PRT. and
there
so-
you go.
so
Yeah,
that's good.
absolutely. And what was interesting was, do you remember Zip Car?
Yeah.
Right. So they had a Zip Car in the garage of the Cork Factory
Okay.
that no one used. So it became our
De facto family car.
yes.
Okay.
And it was fantastic because when we needed to, when we're going out of the city for whatever, we would, just kind of log on, and it was always available. And,
Yeah.
if we needed it for, just an hour or two or a longer period of time, it was right there. It was a little Audi A4 hatchback.
Great car.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so a couple of things. I mean, I always love these stories where like love brings people to Pittsburgh, like you have a partner, spouse. Now, so your wife, like, was she from like the north, south, east, west of Pittsburgh, or was she from the city itself? Like,
Yeah, she
like,
grew.
did she have a sense of where she wanted to be coming into town?
Not really. I mean, she had left Western Pennsylvania, was born and raised in a town called New Brighton.
Okay. Beaver County.
Yep.
Yeah.
And she ended up going to Kent State, and then, as I said earlier, went to graduate school in Manhattan.
Okay.
So when we had gotten back, and after we had, started thinking about, after about a year and a half, we started thinking about buying a home. And we kind of cast a wide net originally. And then one time we were just in our apartment and said, well, we moved all the way out to Western Pennsylvania to be closer to family. So where is the midpoint between
New Brighton and the Strip District? Yeah.
Right. And it was Ben Avon, Swickley,
Okay.
So we went out there and we started looking around, and we spent some time in Swickley, and we liked that coming from the city, walkability was really important.
Sure. Great little downtown and
Yeah, exactly. And so we really liked it, and we had heard through our realtor at the time and that Quaker Valley had a good, was a good school district and everything like that. So it started checking a lot of the boxes. It was also close to downtown, and the thoroughfare to get there via 65 was pretty easy. It was also close to the airport, which was nice.
Yeah, it's a great location.
Yeah, so it was very conveniently located, and we ended up purchasing a home there, and I think it was like 2013 or 2014 or so, and that's when I decided also to start my company. And my company is called Studio St. Germain, and we're a boutique architecture firm, obviously based out of Swickley, PA, and we specialize in sustainability and high performance building.
Awesome. Now, how did you get into architecture? Like, was that like a lifelong passion, or?
I think from what I can remember,
Were you the kid playing with Legos, or what was the?
not, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
But I do remember taking a field trip in middle school to New York City. And I remember being there, and I hadn't been to a major metropolitan prior to that, at that scale, right? So I remember seeing buildings being built there that were skyscrapers, and you see the cranes, and I remember just kind of thinking to myself, how do they do that? How do they get all those materials up that high? And it was something that intrigued me a bit. And while I was in middle school and in high school, I always seemed to kind of lean more towards the arts, the creative arts, drawing and painting and things like that, and music as well. And and I remember when it was a time for graduating and things. I liked science and I liked art.
So it was like, what's the blend?
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of what's the intersection. And in architecture is, I think, intersects those two things, both from a technical sense of building and design.
Sure.
But also a creative one as well.
It's amazing because you have to have an appreciation of history. You have to have an appreciation of the environment,
right?
Of materials and science, and
sure,
how things fit.
Right, and in full transparency too, like most 17 and or 18-year-olds, I didn't really know what it was.
Yeah,
I didn't really know what I was getting myself into.
What architecture was.
Right, yeah. I didn't know. But I knew that it was something that interested me. I was curious about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, particularly today now too, with, when kids are thinking about college and things of that nature, just kind of following what interests you or what you're curious about versus even sometimes like what you may be passionate about, or like what do you want to be,
Yeah.
sort of
The most
narrative.
difficult question for anybody to
What are you
ask.
going to do?
What are you going to do? It's interesting too, like to think about that. I have two daughters. One's 17, and she's starting to, get into that next phase, search, college, and that question, what do you do? Like, what's your and you raised such a good point, like that word curiosity.
Yes,
Right? Like, what are you curious about, and what do you want to explore and go down that path? And that's what I tell her. Like, think of these different things that percolate, and you watch and you listen, and things you talk about, and how do you apply that, right? To a different craft. Is that health? Is it science? Is it
right? And I think it also comes from a place of contribution.
Yeah.
Right. Like what do you want to contribute?
Yeah. Like what can you give? What can you offer?
Right. Exactly.
That's so important.
And what are you good at? And typically the things that you're good at are the things you also enjoy.
Right.
So
otherwise it becomes drudgery, right?
Exactly.
And you're like, why am I sitting here pounding this, this stone? Like, what does that mean? Right.
Right.
What led you to Studio Saint Germain? Like, you're here in Pittsburgh, and I'm assuming you're working for some firm in New York at the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But like, what led you to say, like, I'm going to go out on my own and hang out my own shingle?
Sure. So when I first moved here, I was working for a company called Ibicus, which is a building science company, and
also in the Strip District, right?
Yeah. Right. Which was conveniently
So you're driving your zip car, walking to work.
Yep.
You're living the urban life.
Yes.
This is it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was great. Very strategic planning there.
Shop, getting your groceries at Stan's.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Fish at Woolies.
I mean, I think the Strip. I can't talk enough about the Strip District. As it's a part of the city that I just adore.
Oh,
from Penmac to Parma sausage to Woolies, it's just I love it, and I love taking my girls now there, and it's just such a gem of the city.
I want to come back to that for a quick second.
Sure.
But like, so you make this leap from Ibicus to your own studio.
Yeah, and what I did was, the time that I had spent in New York, I was fortunate where I was doing projects all over. I had spent time out in Calgary, Canada, also in Colorado, San Diego, LA, and obviously New York and New Jersey. And when I was here and I was just kind of walking down the main street of Swickley, I had just said to my wife, what do you think if I started something here? And her response was, I think that's a great idea. And so I started thinking a little bit more about it, and I felt like the background experience that I had living and working in New York City, but more importantly, kind of going to these different areas, I had that background experience I felt could be of value to the region. And
how can you contribute, right?
Exactly. It goes back to that contribution. And I felt like at the time in Pittsburgh, it was kind of going through a bit of this renaissance away from this kind of industrial past that it's known for, and really looking towards the future in terms of being known more as an innovative city, as well as focusing on things like sustainability, which I think really dovetailed into what I was looking to do and wanted to do, because I felt, and I think probably the word that kept coming up as I was thinking about it, and even after I had started the company, was around opportunity. And I felt like there was a lot of opportunity to be able to start to bring those concepts here in the actual work in and of itself.
The concepts of sustainability.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. What's, it's interesting. It makes me think, and just to take those skills and maybe pick on the Strip District for a second. Like, what's your take, on the state of building and sustainability in Pittsburgh right now? Like when you start that's around when you start your firms 2014, 2015.
Yeah, it was 2014.
So, 10 years from that point, like where are we? Like what's your hot take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when if I dial it back 10 years ago, and then kind of compare that to where we are today, I think that from an advocacy and education standpoint, the region is that's a strength that it has, because there's organizations like the Green Voice, Green Building Alliance, at the university level.
Sure.
There's a lot of focus on sustainability as it relates to the built environment. Now, I think that if we take a current, a cross section of the current state today, I think that it's not about the why as much. I feel like
people get the why.
Yeah, the why is there, and it's been talked about, and but it's the how, right? And the how, in my opinion, is really about implementation.
Sure.
Right, and that implementation is really the key piece, and that implementation can come from different places. It's not just one place, right? We've got public policy, as an example, is an important factor. And then you also have the university base, which I think the university base is really driving if anything is being developed at the local universities, whether it be Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, their requirements for what they are building and designing often will have
the scope of work, you're saying.
Yes, right, exactly. So they're really making it part of their RFP and RFQ, and just part of their culture in terms of anything that they're touching and building. They want to incorporate.
They're asking for it.
Right. And not only are they asking for it as a nice to have, it's a requisite, right? It's a requirement. So it's something you're going to have to you're going to have to do and execute. And there are different levels. Some will just be a certification base is often
like a lead standard.
Yeah,
or
right. Like a building performance standard that they want to pursue, as an example. And but I think in the private sector is really where I think that implementation needs to happen more. Right. And
like that's the place where to accelerate?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. I think so, because the universities have always been kind of centers of innovation. Like that they're incorporating.
You have professors that are teaching in the School of Architecture, the School of Engineering. So
Right. And I think a lot of it has to do with legacy too, right? The universities are very legacy based, right?
They're thinking in 10, 20, 30 year increments.
And it's less on return on investment as a strategy.
Like they can make an institutional decision.
Right.
Meaning like they have a longer time horizon versus say like not to pick on a strip mall operator, but a strip mall operator has a 5 to 7 year period in terms of when they might cycle that building in or out of their portfolio. And so that ROI needs to be faster.
Yes.
Not over a 20, 30 year period. So they're making a different mechanical decision.
Right. And at times it may not even be about ROI at all. It's just about
slap a coat of paint on it.
Right. Or this is what, at the university side, this is what we are. This is who we are. This is what we care about. And this is why we're doing it.
Right.
And it's not as much driven from an economic track as it is a legacy track.
That's interesting. I'm fascinated by that in terms of, a couple of things, like being in the construction industry myself, like understanding how much influence like infrastructure owners have over that process. And I don't think they realize that.
Well, and I think the thing is too is I say this a lot at the firm, and even with our clients, is you can't act if you don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's an educational component to that?
Yeah, there is. And I think that that component is really, oftentimes people will, organizations will have an idea of what they'd like to do, but they're not sure. They kind of understand at a level of, okay, I think LEED is probably the building certification that has most penetrated the kind of market, the general market. Like if you were to say,
It's a LEED building.
it's a LEED building, most people will understand that.
Or
Again,
pretend that they know. They'll be like, oh yeah, it's clearly a LEED building.
right.
But they see a plaque or they
Yeah.
understand that there's some sort of process that went through.
And there are a lot of standards out there, so I think that also there's some confusion in the market too. And like, okay, well, I have an existing building or we're building new, and what are my options? What are the things that are important to the organization from a sustainability standpoint, and how can we implement those things? So there's a lot of questions oftentimes, and they need guidance in terms of, we have an idea of what we'd like to do. We're not exactly sure how to do it.
When's that education start? Or when should it start, I guess, is the question. Like, I think about it, from a standpoint of whether it's a, commercial office space and you're doing a renovation, or you're looking to build a new building or a new home or whatever. Like, when should that decision maker start that learning process? Because like we talked about the why, right? Like the why is the economics, it's the health benefits.
Yes, right.
It's the reducing your environmental footprint. Health, economics, environmental footprint, like probably three at the top. I'm sure I'm missing a couple. But like, do folks know about that? Like, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm like, we went into a conversation a couple years ago, learning about like biophilic design.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like understanding like how you bring nature into a space. And that could be anything from light or the, paints and colors and material choices, or just having plants, in a space.
Right.
Like, and I'm always amazed at how many folks really don't know that. Or maybe take it for granted that they're going to trust a professional to do it for them. Or so when does that education need to take shape?
It really needs to start from the top.
Okay.
Right. And oftentimes it depends, because we will have clients that come to us that know exactly what they want. They just need someone to execute it.
Oh, are those the best clients? Like they know. They're more assertive, I guess. I won't say the best or worst, but like
right. It's more about they understand what it is that they want, and as an example, they may know coming in that they are going for a specific certification, and they will know why they're going for that certification, and they may have also had experience in the past with doing these types of projects. So from an education standpoint, they are that avatar is like the well-educated, know what they want, need the firm to execute the vision, right? And then the kind of middle avatar is people who are educated and they understand the importance of it and want to do something. They're just not exactly sure what options are out there.
Okay.
Right, for their particular project.
So you have like advanced, you have middle, and now
right, and then you have people who are, I will go back to the word we used earlier, curious, that are curious about what they can do, but don't know a lot about the process or the options that are really out there. So it becomes a discovery process with them, and we really try and pull out the things that
You're pulling out the palette for them.
right.
Okay.
And one of the things that we've done that's really helped us with that is we have at the company a high performance program, and we've had several projects participate in that program within those different kind of buckets or avatars we discussed.
And when you're talking performance, you're talking energy, water.
Right. What we're talking about is building performance and kind of sustainability. And there's a lot of things that fall under that umbrella, right? And the high performance program was really developed for exactly that, where it's a program that we are looking at. It starts with, it's a process that to help kind of realize the client's vision.
Okay.
And the way that we do that,
starting where they are.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And we have a questionnaire, and from that questionnaire,
It's almost like going to the doctor and it's like, what medication.
assessment tools.
Yeah,
right?
assessment tools. Right.
Yes. And that's the first one. And from that, what we do is we create what we call an environmental performance quotient, or an EPQ.
EPQ. Okay.
Right. And from that,
it's like the Studio Saint Germain version of the TPS report. Like it's like it's like, why are we doing this? And like, it's very important.
right. And it's really focused. It's really coming from them.
Okay.
Right.
It allows you to get to know the client and understand kind of where they're coming from.
Right. And what are their interests?
Yeah.
Right. Because people are interested in different things around sustainability and building performance. And then from that EPQ, there's like a track readiness categories that we have. So some, as I had mentioned before, they may, their track may be economic driven, as an example, and things. So from that EPQ, what we do is we take that and then we build a plan, a performance plan.
Given that assessment.
Yes.
Okay.
And then they can choose what to pursue within that plan. But that plan is also a reflection of them.
So it's like a choose your own adventure, given kind of where you are.
Right. And kind of outlining the options. And some will take a majority of it. Some will kind of pick a couple things that they really want to focus on. And then the last thing that we do is called, we have a calculator. So it's what we call a return on sustainability investment.
Okay.
So we'll incorporate that in as well, just to start to see.
So not just an ROI, an ROSI.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Rosie.
yeah,
Right.
Rosie. Yes. Right. And from that, we have kind of we know what we're doing and how we're going to go about it. And some projects we may be pursuing a certification, other times we won't, or the focuses may be different. Some of them may be really around the energy and carbon emissions savings, and others may be focused more on health and well-being. So things like indoor air quality and monitoring indoor air quality and things of that nature. So there's a lot of different components that are incorporated into building performance and what I call high performance buildings.
In that, you go back to your avatar example, are you seeing a lot of folks understand the impact that health has, or buildings have on health?
Yeah, that's a really good segue, because I feel from an industry perspective, back when the US GVPC started LEED.
This is the U.S. Green Building Council, right?
Yes, right. It was very focused on what we call like the green building movement, right? And the green building movement really focused on energy, which was important. Now, one of the reasons
to reduce our gas consumption, our electricity consumption.
And just because we know that buildings consume 40% of the energy within the total.
That's wild.
Yeah. So it's a big piece.
Right.
And that's where they started, and it made a lot of sense. But it's also the easiest thing to calculate. It's easy math.
It's an easy KPI, key performance indicator.
Exactly.
Like I'm paying a bill to the utilities,
right?
And that's my carbon footprint in terms of scopes 1 and 2.
Yes, and like if you have an existing building, this is how it's performing now, and if we can calculate how it could perform, post renovation. Or if you're doing new, as an example, you'll look at a baseline, a code baseline, and then do comparative analysis to, what you can design towards, and look at those things. And again, when it comes back to the mathematics, it's pretty easy math, right? I think the thing where we've kind of transformed now is we've gone from this green building movement to a healthy building movement.
Huh.
Right. And
what's the statistic? There's something that's like we spend 80 to 90% of our time indoors now.
That's right. Yeah, we have now become, as a species, indoor cats, if you will. And the yeah, we do. This
kind of sad. It's reality, right?
It is.
It's reality.
We do spend 90% of our time inside of a building, and nothing really impacts our bodies and minds more than the built environment that surrounds us. Right. Which you experienced recently on a trip, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think that the interesting piece of the healthy building movement really centers around what the green building movement didn't, which was the people. Right. So
the human component.
Right.
The consumer.
Yes. And when you look at buildings and building performance as an architect, we're building for the occupant.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We're designing for the occupant. So things like the indoor environmental quality of the space, the light, air,
color,
right, and design, right, really impact people's productivity and performance, right? And there are a lot of,
like, a better designed, more welcoming space makes for a better, healthier employee.
Right. Like, as an example, there's a lot of what's interesting in this transition from green building to healthy building is that the business science, the building science, and the health science have kind of come out of these silos.
Oh, wow.
All right. And coalesced, and really kind of what's coming out of that are these studies that have been done over time, but never really kind of got out of academia into the professional environments. Like, and there's plenty of studies around people's performance and productivity. And let's take a learning environment as an example, like a school, right? Or a therapeutic environment like hospitals. Okay. Or even working environments where you've got a lot of people working, for the majority of it, half of their day. If you take something like indoor air quality as an example, the statistic is that a person's performance and productivity can increase between 2 to 5% based on the indoor air quality.
That's a significant number.
It is. Now, here's the thing that is where the green building movement, the math was easy. The healthy building movement, it's more difficult because it's more of an intangible. But
there's not a bill.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are data and metrics around companies and organizations, as an example, where absenteeism is reduced pretty significantly.
Wow. Because people want to be there.
More because of sickness.
Oh.
Right. So when you have better HVAC systems.
You just don't have viruses floating around.
Right. Airborne pathogens aren't lingering in the air as long,
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature. So,
And you saw this with the pandemic too, with like
oh yeah,
HIPAA filters and
yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
and things of that, like people upgrading their HVAC systems
Mm-hmm.
to improve, and we get this right, improve the recycling or the
Yeah.
circulation of air
Right.
through a facility, right?
Right. And I felt like that time, really air quality had its moment.
Was that the high water mark, or are we continuing to ascend?
It had its moment. I think that it I'm not going to say it's fallen off per se,
Yeah.
but the urgency of it and the focus on it is less. Where like I remember during the height, you couldn't pick up a paper or read a paper and not see something about ventilation
Right.
or air quality. And, you'd even see it, particularly in real estate, where that became,
Mm-hmm.
an amenity that was more important to a buyer than pool in the rental
It's interesting.
apartment complex or what have you.
One of the things I want to go back to something you touched on very early on, which is like this idea of, public policy,
Yeah.
right? Like, so, just to kind of play back a little bit, like you have universities that are out in front, they're putting, requests for proposals together that are
Mhm.
incorporating sustainability
Mhm.
elements. To some degree, you have governments doing the
Yes.
same,
Yeah.
state, federal,
Mhm.
local. I think, still to this day, two of the only living building in the region, maybe in the country, are actually public facilities here in Pittsburgh,
Mhm.
right? With the Frick Environmental Center
Yes.
and over at Phipps,
Yeah.
which is like the culmination of all the things that you're talking about,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And then you had some, movement in the private sector. Like I think about like PNC's new tower,
Mhm.
right? Which
Yeah.
is just a, shining star in terms of just I don't want to say this for PNC employees, but like it's an enjoyable space. It's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
functional. What are things in that public policy realm that could start to kind of maybe push this
Mhm.
next generation,
Sure.
right? Like if we've educated folks, like you're saying, and we've had some early adoption, but we haven't had like mass adoption, right?
Right.
What are those things that, whether it's the state, federal, or local level, maybe like
Mhm.
focus locally, like what are things that we can do locally where we have the greatest influence and control that can start to bring some of these
Sure.
decisions into the fold?
Yeah, I think there was a program, Pennsylvania Housing Finance Authority.
Mm-hmm.
They had it was probably about, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 years ago, I think was when it started, where they had a program there that was a tax incentive for multifamily housing if it
There's
was
affordable housing too, right?
if it was designed to a building performance standard called Passive House.
I remember this.
Yeah, and so they
Maybe
had
to explain Passive House before you go down.
okay.
What is Passive House for listeners?
Sure. Passive House is a building performance standard, and it was originated in Germany. That's where it started. So
Why it was spelled HAUS?
yeah, so Haus in German is building.
Yeah.
So when they translated, I think they kind of did a poor job when they translated, because a lot of people
They use Google Translate? Or is
I don't
that
know. I'm not sure what happened there, but it was house, and so when if you can think of how people will relate, they'll say, "Oh, it's for houses," and it
is.
it
Can be.
is, and it can also be for
Commercial or
any building
Yeah.
really. And it's not a prescriptive standard; it's a performance-based standard, and it's quite strict. So if you take if you take from a building performance standard, it's one of the more stringent ones that that exists, but it is performance based, and the nice thing about that is that it's not prescriptive. So you know, you can kind of use any type of wall assembly that you want and things of that nature. So you can, but as long as you're hitting certain targets per the standard, it will you can pursue certification or maintain certification.
And so like that incentive program that they have
Yes.
starts to catalyze.
Yes, it did. And there was a pretty healthy tax incentive, and you had to apply. And at the time, they said that the only requirement was that it get pre-certified, not final certification.
Okay.
So we started getting calls from all over the state with,
how do we do this?
right.
Yeah.
How do we do this? We don't know much about this, but, and so that program really drove a lot of attention to what it was. And because that incentive, they wanted to leverage, right? And it's continued since then. And now their requirement is you have to, in order to get the funding, you have to have it final certified.
Okay.
And it's continued to, I think, increase in terms of the amount of projects and interest. They were really surprised by how much interest was coming. I think the double-edged sword sometimes on the incentive side is, you may be bringing people to that just because of the incentive and not because of the
want or the need.
Right. So there's always there's a little bit of that kind of catch-22 sometime, and where I think the idea behind the incentive is the incentive exists, and then eventually it gets to a point of enough people are doing it that it can still sustain without the incentive.
That's interesting.
Right.
Now, so that's with looking at affordable housing, but how do you extend that beyond into the masses, right?
Yeah, I think, there are, I was at a conference, the fall of last year, and it was actually a passive house conference. And there I learned about this program called Mass Save. And again, this is another example of kind of public policy kind of coming in and incentivizing. Now, this wasn't based specifically for like affordable housing or any specific building type, really.
Yeah.
And what they were doing was the incentive was that they were giving money as a certain amount towards a feasibility study.
Okay.
Right. So money is coming into the project where if they were interested and wanted to pursue high performance building and sustainability, or even more so a certification, the Mass Save is paying for that feasibility study. And then once, let's say you get past the feasibility study and you're green lighted, then they also have funds allocated to the design team to do energy modeling and things of that nature, to understand, well, if they're going for a certification, how close is it towards certification?
So it's giving them data and gets the ball rolling to
exactly, and it gives them really important information. But it's also paid for, right? So that's coming off of the front end expense side.
So some of those soft costs.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. And then if the projects continue and get built, then there are funds allocated towards each individual project. Like, let's say if it's a multifamily project, each unit gets X amount of dollars up to a certain amount on the back end after it's constructed. So I think that and I believe the way that that's funded is through the utility. So the utility pays for all of that, but then there's I don't know if it's a tax or something in the utility that then
There's like a rebate structure.
right, that then that what they have put out there is coming back in, essentially.
Do you see that a couple questions here as we come to like the home stretch? I'm interested to hear your thoughts about the idea of like the workforce around this, like the technical side,
Yeah.
right? Like, we've talked about the owner a little bit. We've talked about the client. What about that process of bringing the technician in? Like, like there's, I know on our side in civil construction, there's huge demand for people, like to have the skilled labor, the engineers, the folks that are in the design and the construction side to help build these, green infrastructure assets, or just infrastructure assets, period. Is the same the case you're seeing on the building side, like the need to bring kind of those trades and the design technicians in?
Yes, I think from an industry standpoint, oftentimes the architects and the engineers know about this first and are implementing it.
They're the early adopters,
right? Exactly. And then what happens is there's the trade familiarity, right? And
is it buildable?
Right. Is it something that requires some training of the trades, if you will? And I think at the beginning of the project, and as you're getting into construction, again, it comes back to this education piece, where they just need to understand this is how you're used to building something, and this is a little bit different, and this is why, and this is maybe how you can go about that.
Yeah.
And as long as I think everyone is on the same thought pathway, because I think the thought pathway is a really important piece. We've been a part of projects where passive house certified projects where the general contractor and the subcontractors had never done one before.
Okay.
As an example. But they were interested in learning.
Add to their resume.
Right.
Yeah.
And they saw things being done a different way as an opportunity. Right. And wanted to be part of something. And I think that is really what allowed the lack of experience, direct experience, to not really be a barrier, but more of an opportunity to see it through. And I think if you can build that kind of coalition of the willing from the owner to the design team, to the general contractor, down to the subcontractors, then it's possible. And I know that from direct experience because we've done it, and we've seen it,
and you've seen it happen.
And there's something about changing the mindset, because when people see and understand that they're doing something that may be different, and they understand the value of it and why it's being done, then that's some of the things that you'll see with them, and when you're going onto the job site and things, it's something they really want to be a part of. It's something they feel that they have some equity in. And they have a responsibility to execute, and that really kind of drives them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. One final question is maybe something that we kind of started with a little bit early on, but maybe before we even jumped into the conversation, but like this idea of like quality.
Yes.
And the importance of, the importance of design, and then there's the importance of good design.
Yes.
But there's also like the acceptance of beauty.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by it. Like you mentioned, I just came back from a trip overseas, and you see how good design affects people in a positive way. Also how it like attracts people.
Yes.
I think that's like one of the things that I took away from my trip was that, we were visiting places that were centuries old. And the reason why we were visiting them because they were centuries old was because that they had a human scale.
Yes.
They were accessible to people, and you see cathedrals and the beauty of the art and the craftsmanship. How do we? I know this is a big question.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
but you know where I'm going with this. Like,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
how do we kind of like reignite that fire, in us, to not just accept the mundane, rote kind of design that we've come to accept here in America specifically, but in our cities, in our communities, in our homes. Like, as an architect, like what's some of your wisdom that you would pass on to kind of share with folks in the audience about that? Like, how do we bring good design into our life, into our communities?
Right. No, that's a great question. I think the thing that we're battling against right now is speed is the structuring value of the 21st century.
How fast we can build things.
Not so much how fast we can build them, but how fast we have to move from point A to point B, meaning start to completion.
Yep.
Right. So what becomes absent from that is oftentimes quality and craftsmanship.
Yeah.
Okay, because anything of quality and craftsmanship does require time.
Right.
And you can't really shortcut that. And oftentimes that quality and that craftsmanship is done by someone.
Yeah.
A person.
Who has to take the time and have the skill.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you look back at, like you said, you went on a trip to overseas, back in the, if you go back to that time in that area, speed wasn't as much of a factor, right? I mean, if you look at Sagrada Familia by Antonio Gaudi, it's still being constructed.
Still under construction. I saw the cranes.
Right.
I can
almost
finished.
Confirm. Right.
It almost finished.
Yeah. And I think that when we design and build with that mindset, that people will respond to that, whether they you don't have to technically understand form, function, rhythm, repetition, a lot of the things that are part of kind of architectural design and composition and things of that, massing, and it's just something that people understand viscerally.
It's
it's inside of us.
Right.
Okay. Like if you go to a Gothic cathedral and you walk in and you look up, it's not only are you going to be wowed, but you're also going to be oftentimes moved. And the difference between wow and move is important, right? Because it's a lot easier to wow than it is to move, right? So if someone's moved by an environment that they're in, then oftentimes that can elicit an action, right? For that person to either want to learn more about the place that they were at and, the architecture or who was behind it and things of that nature. And that has a lot of positive, benefits. And I think that because it is visceral, and we all understand it, we yearn for it. And when we talk about things like sustainability, a lot of the focus of that conversation is often centered around building performance and things of that nature. But one of the things that at times is often overlooked is that when you build and design something of quality that lasts a long time, that's one of the most sustainable buildings that you can design. And interestingly, when what also comes into that fold is that people want to protect it.
Mm.
Right. So then there's this piece that people value it from not only an individual level, but at a scale of a community or a city.
Yes.
And they're protecting this thing. And then once that kind of protection piece comes into it, then it can really, sustain for even longer. And I think that that's a really powerful tool. And as an architect and design professional, we really need to focus and convince the people in whom we work with and for the importance of those things. And I think, the tenor of a lot of what's being built and the reaction towards things recently, if you are not as positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they may not be able to speak, again, technically why, but they understand that it's not that, it could be a missed opportunity, in terms of the design and things like, beauty and its context.
It's interesting. I one final question, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to wrap that back. You made me think about our earlier conversation about the Strip.
Yeah.
How does what you're saying apply to a place like the Strip right now that is probably one of the more dynamic, always been dynamic locations in the city and the region? But it's also like this interesting alchemy between the old and the new.
Right.
And change and reuse. And how is that applying in a space like that right now for you?
Well, I mean, I think that there are certain things that, in the Strip as an example, and I mentioned some of the places that are kind of institutional, if you will. It's not about, in those circumstances, it's you're not going there because of the building.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Sorta.
I mean,
yeah, I know what you mean.
You know what I'm saying? What's taking you there, unlike the, maybe the Carnegie Museum or, Heinz Hall as an example.
Yeah.
The architecture isn't necessarily like what's really drawing you there. It's an experience. Right.
Which the buildings lend to, right?
Yes, they do. And I think what's happening there in that kind of main corridor is it exists, but the thing, there's the buildings themselves are older. They may be underutilized, right? And a lot of the stuff that's happening around it is new, right? With housing and other
different uses,
different uses and things like that. And the stuff that's being constructed is new, right? Is new construction. And I think there's a little bit of a resistance to change for the main kind of thoroughfare of Penn Avenue, if you will.
Sure.
And I think with that, there's a resistance to some of that as well. Like if how can you reimagine that for the future?
For
right?
Transportation, for new uses.
Right. Like how are the uses above the ground level activated in a way that a lot of it, when you kind of look up, there isn't, it doesn't seem very activated, or what I like to use the term like highest and best use. So I think you have to be sensitive, and it really comes down to context, and where you really just have to be sensitive to how can we take this area and improve it in a way for the future, but at the same time be what it is that we're putting there is something of a reflection in the design, in the construction, in the materials, and that that pay homage to that.
Yeah, the like respects the past, but paves the way for the future.
Right. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that you have to sacrifice one for the other
Yeah, you don't.
in architecture, right? Where if it's sustainable, then the aesthetic, something has to be, it's one or the other, right? And I think you can really have both. You can have a building that is sensitive to the environment and thoughtful in its building performance, because again, people are occupying it,
Right.
And but also beautiful from an aesthetic standpoint. And one of the things that I founded the firm on this philosophy of building to give back.
Yeah.
And really what that means for us is architecture as an art and architecture as a public good. And I think that those two things also are really important and reflect a little bit of, okay, architecture is an art, right? And design and beauty and light and air and and material and all these things are very important, but so is the public good. And I think sustainability kind of dovetails into that really well.
That's amazing. Let's leave it right there, Nathan St. Germain. Thank you so much for being a guest here on The Green Voice.
Thank you for having me.
Sharing a lot of great insights into the world of architecture and how we can think about sustainability and how we design our buildings and our communities. We hope to have you back again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you for listening in to The Green Voice. We appreciate you, as always, for liking us and listening in to some of these great guests. I'm Grant Ervin from S&B USA. We'll check you out on the next episode. Thanks much and have a great day.